Los Angeles was once the city where dreams came true, where every street corner whispered promises of stardom, where the golden sunset painted hope across Hollywood Boulevard. But now something has changed so deeply that people who leave never look back. And the question everyone is afraid to ask out loud is, why did the City of Angels become the place angels abandoned? And what nobody tells you is that this transformation didn't happen overnight. It was a slow erosion of everything that made Los Angeles the magnetic force it once was. And if you have ever felt that inexplicable pull toward a place only to watch it crumble into something unrecognizable, you will understand what millions are experiencing right now as they pack their belongings and drive away from the city they once called home, never to return. There was a time when Los Angeles represented the pinnacle of American possibility, when its very name conjured images of palm trees swaying against endless blue skies, of beaches stretching forever along the Pacific coast, of neighborhoods where every ethnicity and culture blended into a mosaic of humanity that felt both chaotic and magical. The city thrived on its own mythology, built on the foundations of the entertainment industry that pulled talented souls from every corner of the planet, all believing that if they could just make it to Los Angeles, they could make it anywhere. The energy was palpable. You could feel it in the air, in the bustling restaurants of Silver Lake, in the quiet determination of actors waiting tables in West Hollywood, in the late-night recording sessions in studios scattered across the valley. People came to Los Angeles not just to chase fame, but to chase freedom, to reinvent themselves in a city that seemed to reward those brave enough to transform. The weather alone felt like a blessing, that perpetual sunshine that seemed to promise that good things were always just around the corner, that winter never truly came, that darkness never really won. Los Angeles was a place where you could start over, where your past didn't define you, where the question was never where you came from, but where you were going. The first crack in the dream appeared gradually, but started with something as simple as numbers, as mundane as monthly budgets and rental listings. Los Angeles began to price out the very people who made it special, the artists and dreamers and risk-takers who gave the city its soul. Rent surged past what a reasonable human being could justify spending just to have a roof over their head. A one-bedroom apartment that might have cost $1,200 a month in the early 2000s suddenly jumped to $2,500, then $3,000, then kept climbing with no signs of stopping. But that was just the beginning, because with rent came every other cost. Groceries that doubled in price overnight, gas that made every commute feel like a financial hemorrhage, parking that cost more per hour than some people made in that same hour. Young professionals found themselves working 2 jobs just to afford a room in a shared house with 3 or 4 strangers, all of them exhausted, all of them wondering when their big break would come. The dream of home ownership became a cruel joke, where the median home price soared past $800,000, then $1 million, then kept climbing, locking out entire generations from ever building equity or stability. People who had lived in Los Angeles for decades suddenly found themselves calculating whether they could afford to stay in the city they loved, whether holding on to the dream was worth the financial devastation. And slowly, quietly, without any single dramatic moment, people began to leave. Not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. But the exodus wasn't just about money. It was about what the city had become when money became the only thing that mattered, when the soul of Los Angeles was sacrificed at the altar of real estate speculation and luxury developments. Neighborhoods that had been vibrant communities suddenly became targets for developers who saw only dollar signs. Buildings were torn down overnight. Mom-and-pop businesses that had served communities for 30 or 40 years received eviction notices. And in their place rose glass towers and chain stores that could have existed anywhere, generic spaces with no connection to the history or culture of the neighborhoods they displaced. Walk through Echo Park or Highland Park or Venice Beach, and you will see what was lost. Those quirky dive bars replaced by minimalist cafes serving $16 avocado toast. Those family-owned taquerias replaced by farm-to-table restaurants with waiting lists. Those affordable housing units replaced by luxury condos with pretentious names that sit half-empty because they were never meant to house people, but to store wealth for foreign investors who would never even visit. The people who made these neighborhoods special were pushed out systematically, replaced by wealthy transplants who wanted the aesthetic of authenticity without any of the diversity or grit that made Los Angeles interesting. The city lost its sense of community, that feeling that you were part of something larger than yourself. As costs rose and people churned through apartments every year or two, as longtime residents were displaced, that sense of community evaporated, leaving behind a city that felt increasingly lonely despite being home to millions of people. You could live in Los Angeles for years and never truly know anyone, never feel connected to the place in any meaningful way. And that isolation began to weigh on people in ways that were difficult to articulate, but impossible to ignore. Then came the homeless crisis, and any remaining illusion that Los Angeles was still the city of dreams shattered completely. Tent encampments appeared on sidewalks throughout the city, not just downtown, but in residential neighborhoods, along the beaches, in parks where children used to play. On any given night, more than 60,000 people were sleeping on the streets of Los Angeles County, and that number kept growing, despite billions of dollars supposedly allocated to solving the problem. Walking through any part of the city meant navigating around makeshift shelters, stepping over needles and human waste, witnessing raw desperation of people who had fallen through every crack in the social safety net. The psychological toll of this daily confrontation with human suffering changed something fundamental about what it felt like to live in Los Angeles. People became hardened because you cannot maintain your empathy at full intensity when confronted with tragedy every single day, when every trip to the grocery store means walking past people clearly in crisis, when every drive down the freeway means seeing sprawling encampments beneath the overpasses. The city government seemed paralyzed, unable or unwilling to implement solutions that actually worked, instead spending enormous sums on programs that barely made a dent while the situation deteriorated. For many residents, this became the breaking point, not because they lacked compassion, but because they could not reconcile paying some of the highest taxes in the country while watching their city descend into third-world conditions, while basic services disappeared, while quality of life evaporated before their eyes. Parents looked at their children playing where broken glass and used needles littered sidewalks and asked whether this was really where they wanted to raise families. Business owners watched their storefronts get broken into repeatedly and wondered whether it was worth continuing to operate in a city that seemed incapable of maintaining basic order and safety. And then the crime began to rise, with a fear that had never really defined Los Angeles before. Property crime exploded. Car break-ins became so common that people stopped leaving anything visible in their vehicles. Package theft turned into an epidemic. Retail stores began closing because losses from shoplifting made operations impossible. Major chains pulled out of Los Angeles entirely, and remaining stores locked up basic items behind security glass, turning every shopping trip into a degrading experience. Worse than property crime was the sense that violence was becoming random and unpredictable. Stories circulated of people being attacked on hiking trails, of road rage incidents turning deadly, of shootings in broad daylight. The famous beaches that had symbolized the Los Angeles lifestyle became places people avoided after dark. What made this particularly insidious was how authorities responded with indifference, how district attorneys implemented policies that essentially decriminalized theft below certain amounts, how police response times stretched to hours for all but the most serious emergencies, how the justice system became a revolving door. Residents felt abandoned by the very institutions supposed to protect them, and that abandonment bred cynicism and anger that fundamentally changed the relationship between Angelenos and their city. People who had once defended Los Angeles fiercely suddenly found themselves unable to mount that defense anymore, unable to justify staying in a place that seemed determined to make life as difficult and dangerous as possible. The traffic, legendarily bad, somehow got even worse. Commutes that used to take 45 minutes stretched to 90 minutes or more, with no improvements despite endless construction projects. Public transportation remained inadequate, forcing most people to rely on cars even as roads became impassable. The driving itself became frightening. Street racing on major thoroughfares, aggressive tailgating, hit-and-run accidents disturbingly common. For people trying to build lives in Los Angeles, the traffic became a soul-crushing daily reminder that infrastructure had failed. The dream of California living died in the parking lot that Los Angeles had become. The wildfires turned occasional emergencies into annual catastrophes. Entire neighborhoods burned to the ground in hours. Even when flames stayed away, smoke would come thick and choking, turning the sky orange for weeks. Air quality reached hazardous levels year-round. Insurance companies refused coverage or charged astronomical premiums. Beyond fires came earthquakes, always lurking, creating constant low-level anxiety about whether disaster would finally make staying untenable. Perhaps nothing captured the decline more than what happened to Hollywood itself. The entertainment industry hollowed out, shifting away from Los Angeles. Tax incentives in other states lured productions to Atlanta, New Mexico, Canada. Streamers had headquarters in Silicon Valley, treating Los Angeles as just another location. Strikes revealed how precarious employment had become. For thousands who had moved to Los Angeles for entertainment, who had sacrificed years waiting tables, the realization that opportunities were drying up was devastating. Landmarks fell into disrepair or became luxury hotels. The Chinese Theater and Walk of Fame became tourist traps. Hollywood Boulevard became a grim corridor locals avoided. The magic was gone, replaced by harsh reality that Hollywood would relocate wherever the bottom line looked best. Cultural institutions struggled as funding dried up. Museums cut hours, theaters closed, music venues shut down. The creative class was pushed out, forced to choose between poverty in Los Angeles or stability elsewhere. When they left, they took something essential, that quality that made Los Angeles feel like a place where anything was possible. What replaced that creativity was bland corporate culture you could find anywhere. For people who had come because it was weird and wild, watching that uniqueness get erased was like watching a loved one lose their personality, still present but fundamentally changed in ways that could never be reversed. The social fabric frayed as political dysfunction made it impossible to address problems. Every issue became polarized. Every solution was rejected. City council meetings devolved into shouting matches. Ballot measures made things worse. Corruption scandals reinforced the sense that leaders were incompetent or corrupt. When people lose faith in their government, dangerous apathy sets in, and that apathy had taken root. And so they voted with their feet, loading up moving trucks and driving away in resignation, accepting that the Los Angeles they had loved was gone and was never coming back. The pandemic accelerated everything, exposing every weakness. Lockdowns lasting longer than almost anywhere else devastated small businesses. Restaurants that had been fixtures for decades closed permanently. Remote work revealed to thousands they didn't need to be in Los Angeles, that they could maintain careers somewhere cheaper and more livable. When these workers relocated to Austin or Nashville or Denver, they told their friends, creating a cascade that turned the trickle into a flood. The pandemic revealed how hollowed out community had become, because when crisis hit, those support networks often didn't exist. Watching other cities handle things with flexibility while Los Angeles remained locked down indefinitely made it impossible to deny something was fundamentally broken. The technology industry, which had seemed like salvation, also pulled back. Talent didn't want to move to Los Angeles when they could work remotely or choose cities with better infrastructure. Startups found operating in the city far more difficult than promised. Venture capital directed funds elsewhere. The dream that Los Angeles could become Silicon Beach faded like all the other dreams. The opportunity passed, and Los Angeles remained dependent on industries themselves in decline. Through all of this, through rising costs and homelessness and crime and traffic and fires and political dysfunction and cultural erosion, the people who loved Los Angeles held on as long as they could, hoping things would get better, hoping the city would find its way back. But hope requires evidence. and the evidence kept pointing in the opposite direction. The people who remained fell into two categories. Those wealthy enough that problems didn't touch them, who lived in gated communities and could insulate themselves from decay, and those too poor or too rooted to leave, who had family obligations or lacked resources to relocate. Everyone in the middle, the working professionals and young families and artists and entrepreneurs who should have been the backbone of the city's future, they were leaving, and with their departure went Los Angeles's vitality and innovation and hope. What remained was a city increasingly divided between the ultra-wealthy and desperate poor, with less and less middle ground between extremes. And now we arrive at the present moment, at the hidden truth that nobody wants to acknowledge but everyone secretly knows, which is that Los Angeles is in a death spiral, not dying overnight, but declining in a way that will be difficult, if not impossible, to reverse. The city has lost more residents than it has gained for several years running, a net outflow representing not just numbers, but loss of talent and energy and optimism. The businesses and institutions that remain are increasingly fragile, operating on thin margins. The infrastructure is crumbling, roads full of potholes, water systems aging and inadequate, power grids stressed to breaking point every summer. The government is functionally bankrupt, committed to pension obligations that consume ever larger portions of the budget while basic services deteriorate. And perhaps most troubling is that there seems to be no political will to make hard choices necessary to change course, no leader willing to tell uncomfortable truths and implement unpopular solutions. Instead, there is finger-pointing and blame-shifting and incremental half-measures that address symptoms while ignoring root causes. The problems are not mysteries, but understanding problems and solving them are two entirely different things. And Los Angeles has proven time and again that it is institutionally incapable of solving the problems it has created for itself. The decline continues, accelerating even, as each problem compounds the others in a negative feedback loop that becomes harder to escape with each passing year. The people who have left describe a feeling of relief mixed with sadness, grief for what they lost, but liberation from constant stress and struggle. They talk about being able to afford homes, about their kids playing safely, about commutes measured in minutes rather than hours, about governments that actually pick up trash and maintain parks. They talk about rediscovering what quality of life actually means, about having time and energy for relationships, and simply enjoying existence rather than merely surviving. When they visit Los Angeles to see friends or family, they are struck by how much worse it looks, how quickly decay has advanced, how they made the right decision to leave when they did. They see the Los Angeles they remember through the overlay of what it has become, and the contrast is jarring and sad and frightening. These are not people who wanted to leave. They are refugees from a city that no longer functions, economic migrants fleeing a failing system, and their stories are remarkably similar despite different backgrounds, which suggests the problems are systemic and deep rather than superficial and easily fixed. The question that haunts everyone is whether Los Angeles can come back, whether there is any realistic path from where the city is now to where it needs to be, whether the decline can be arrested and reversed. The optimists point to Los Angeles's history of reinvention, to natural advantages of weather and geography and diversity that cannot be replicated elsewhere, arguing that problems are solvable with sufficient political will and smart policy. The pessimists counter that this time is different, that the scale and complexity of problems have reached a point where meaningful reform is impossible, that political culture is too captured by special interests and ideological rigidity to allow pragmatic solutions, that the death spiral has its own momentum now that cannot be stopped. And the realists understand that Los Angeles will continue to exist, that cities are remarkably resilient even in decline, but that the Los Angeles of the future will be a very different place than the Los Angeles of the past. Smaller perhaps, less relevant certainly, more divided and less dynamic. A city that represents failure and missed opportunities rather than dreams and possibilities. Empty tables in restaurants that used to have waiting lists. Empty storefronts on streets that used to buzz with activity. Empty houses in neighborhoods that used to be full of families. Empty studios where creativity used to flourish. Empty promises from politicians who used to inspire hope. empty dreams of people who used to believe in magic. The City of Angels has become a city of absences, defined more by what it has lost than by what it still possesses. And the people who remain walk through spaces haunted by ghosts of better days. Memories of when Los Angeles felt alive and possible and worth the sacrifice. The hidden truth that nobody wants to say out loud but everyone understands in their bones is that Los Angeles betrayed the people who loved it most. That the city took the loyalty and energy and creativity of millions and squandered it on greed and dysfunction and ideological purity. That the decision-makers who should have been stewards of Los Angeles's future instead presided over its decline with a combination of incompetence and indifference that would be almost impressive if it weren't so tragic. The people who leave are not abandoning Los Angeles. They are recognizing that Los Angeles abandoned them first. That the city no longer values or wants or can sustain the kinds of people who made it special. That loyalty to a place that has become hostile to your existence is not virtue, but masochism. And so they go, carrying with them memories of what Los Angeles used to be, of what it promised to be, of what it might have been if different choices had been made. And they build new lives in new places. And they warn others thinking about moving to Los Angeles that the dream is dead, that the city cannot deliver on its promises anymore, that nobody comes back after they leave, because there is nothing left to come back to. Maybe there is still hope buried somewhere beneath layers of disappointment and dysfunction. Maybe Los Angeles will find a way to remember what it used to stand for and rebuild itself into something worthy of its history and potential. Maybe the people will demand better, and the leaders will finally listen, and the systems will be reformed, and the decline will be arrested and reversed. Maybe the next generation will look back on this era as just a dark chapter in a longer story of resilience and renewal. Maybe the City of Angels will earn that name again, will become a place where people are lifted up rather than ground down, where dreams are nurtured rather than destroyed, where community is valued over profit and humanity is prioritized over ideology. But if you are watching this and wondering whether you should move to Los Angeles, whether you should stay, whether the city can still offer you the life you imagine, then consider this. Every person who left had a breaking point, a moment when they realized that hope was not enough, that love for a place could not overcome the daily reality of dysfunction and decline, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit that a dream has died and find the courage to pursue a new one somewhere else. Consider the stories of everyone who has walked away and ask yourself whether you want your story to be the same. Whether you want to spend years fighting against systems that will not change. Whether you want to sacrifice your financial security and mental health and quality of life for a city that will not fight for you in return. The sunset still looks beautiful over the Pacific Ocean. The palm trees still sway in the breeze. The Hollywood sign still overlooks the basin it has watched over for decades. The physical beauty of Los Angeles remains. The geography and the climate that attracted millions in the first place. But beauty without function is just decoration, and decoration cannot sustain a city or a life or a dream. Los Angeles needs people who will love it enough to tell the truth about it, who will demand better and refuse to accept excuses, who will build the systems and institutions necessary to create a genuinely livable city rather than a performative paradise for the privileged few. Until that happens, until Los Angeles decides to become worthy of the people it keeps losing, the exodus will continue, the decline will accelerate, and the hidden truth will become impossible to hide. The City of Angels has fallen, not from grace necessarily, but from relevance, from vitality, from the special status it once held in the American imagination. And the people who once would have died to live there now cannot wait to leave. And they tell everyone who will listen, do not make the same mistake we made. Do not sacrifice years of your life for a city that has forgotten how to value the people who built it. Do not believe the mythology when the reality is right there in front of you, impossible to deny. Nobody comes back to Los Angeles after this. Not because they are weak or disloyal or lacking in perseverance, but because they are smart enough to recognize when a relationship has become toxic, when love has turned to resentment, when the promise has been revealed as a lie. They leave. They build new lives. They find places that appreciate them and sustain them and allow them to thrive. And Los Angeles, left behind with its problems and its pride and its refusal to change, continues its slow dissolution, mourned by those who remember what it used to be, ignored by those who never understood what was lost. A cautionary tale about what happens when a city forgets that its greatest asset is not its geography or its weather or its mythology, but its people, and what happens when those people finally deserve better.